Have a few more cool hands to show you, and then we'll look at my stats call today. So let's go ahead and look at some check raises. Here we have raise call, ace 10 note, pure 3-bet on 100 big blinds. Here on 200 does get into the call range. Jack 10-10 goes for the check call. Ace 10 is going to be a pretty high frequency check raise on these boards. Typically speaking, trips with the ace kicker does like to check raise a good portion of the time, definitely a majority of the time. Couple things on that. It does check call occasionally to check raise later streets. And additionally, as the flop size gets bigger, the check raising happens less often. So if this was a 1 big blind bet, we would see much more check raising than a 2 big blind bet. But we don't really need to get too deep into the post-flop stuff here. We have full pot on the turn. Check call seems good. Check full pot on the river and all in. And I just think this is a really cool bluff because we see that Supremus using the size. Start off with what are we representing? We're saying that we have a full house, not a flush, really. Maybe the nut flush, maybe like a. No, you're really saying you have a boat with this size. So, because you can't even really have like a paired nut flush, right? So you're saying you have a full house. And what do we want to block then? We want to block our opponent having a full house. Another cool aspect of this bluff is we don't have a diamond. And we want our opponent to have a flush here. You really want your opponent to have a straight or a flush. I think straights are getting on the edge of too thin here. I don't use the size in position on the river in single raise pot. I use 67-150. Which we'll talk about when we get to post-flop, guys. I like that we're in the pre-flop section of the course, and we're just like deep in some river check raises. I think that's appropriate for the course. Anyway, so I use 67% pot or 150% pot here on the river. So I don't really know exactly what full pot looks like for value. My hunch is ace-king is around the line on the size. I think that a little less, let's say he has 9-8 of spades. I don't like this size. If he had ace-king, ace of diamonds, I would like the size a lot more because then it becomes much harder to have flushes. But typically speaking, I think for full pot here, you want to have a round nut straight or a flush. And then realistically, of course, your boats. So this play seems pretty cool from Supremus. This bet size seems maybe it's just a small frequency. Uses the size from Slumbot. Either way, I really like this bluff. But when you live in the slums, guys, you don't really care. You're just willing to put in 200 big blinds on a straight with all the stuff out there. Okay. This one was very cool. I like this one a lot. This was what I was talking about earlier. Here we have raise call, which is fine. 6-0 on a mixed pre-flop. Queen 5-3. Check bet call. Okay, we got ourselves a standardish hand happening. One thing to think about here on this flop with sixes in position, you bet sixes a lot more than you do jacks. I don't know if any check raising happens versus small sizes, but versus the half pot, I imagine sixes are going to play pure call. Turn 7, check, check, river jack, check, pot, all you can eat. Just two bots going at it. My thoughts here. Well, I want to talk about this river check raise idea because I find that there's a couple arguments that can be made that might confuse people. So let's start off with what hands does Slumbot check back the turn that bet river? It's not going to be a straight. If you look at solutions, Slumbot, the in-position player here, should not check back with the nut straight. Maybe if you get really, really deep, it starts to happen occasionally. I've seen it occasionally on some super deep stack stuff. But overall, when you have the nuts, you simply just want to bet the turn. So then the next question you could logically ask yourself is, why do I want to block the nut straight here? If in Supremus' shoes, wouldn't I rather block two pairs? Why do I want to block the nut straight? And the answer is you block him from blocking you. Okay? So it is less likely that Slumbot has a hand that blocks you having the straight. What's your thinnest you can go for value here? It's probably really around a set, but getting kind of close because certainly Slumbot can play jacks like this, and you're risking so much here to win so little that the other player doesn't have to call many hands. Slumbot can call pocket jacks and maybe a little bit of like queen jack and be good. So I don't really know if you can even do this with a set. it's just simply too big of a bet. Maybe your sets can do it. I don't know. But if Slumbot's call range here is going to be pocket jacks and a little bit of queen jack, I don't really see how this size can be optimal for a set. So you're kind of just saying that you have a straight, right? Because a straight can clearly take the size. And remember, this is a min-raise preflop, so you have 6-4 off and 6-4 suited. So what Supremus is doing here is trying to prevent Slumbot from having a hand like Queen 6. Queen 6 feels like maybe even a better bet call on the river than Queen Jack. Because if I have Queen 6, I block them from having that straight that we already mentioned. And the Jack is kind of irrelevant here for Supremus. Like maybe we can use Queen Jack here as a value bet, right? But then what do you really get called by? Maybe a little bit of Queen 6. I don't know. So I guess the point really is here, when you're making these river bluffs, even in the lines where it's almost impossible for the other player to have the nuts, typically speaking, the solutions still indicate that you want to be blocking the nuts in those spots because it blocks them from having better removal effects against your range that you're representing. Okay. And don't worry, we'll go into a bunch more of that stuff later, so you don't have to worry about that too much. That's going to be a wrap here on the hands. Again, we already went way too deep in here, but the point of the matter is this thing is legit. These guys know what they're doing with the construction of these ranges, and this bot is a crusher.